So, very welcome to Marco Encontro. I am Marco Renes, and I'm very glad to have you here today. So, in the British Museum is a work of art unparalleled in its importance to the world at large, and most of all, to the LGBT community. So it deserves to be known by mankind. It is the Warren Cup. And today, I have the privilege of interviewing Sir Claude Hankes, a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, an honorary fellow Corpus Christi College, Oxford, who secured this iconic work art for the British Museum. I am grateful to the British Museum for having made the images of the cup available for my interview with Sir Claude. Thank you very much, British Museum. So everybody get ready, take your popcorn, and come with me to watch this incredible interview. So, good evening, Sir Claude. Very welcome to my show.
Good evening, Margaret.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Delighted to be with you.
Thank you very much. So, could you explain us a little bit more about the history of the Warren Cup?
Yes, the history, as far as we know it, is that it was found in Palestine and then sold to Mr. E.P. Warren. And Mr. Warren was an eccentric both collector, academic, who had a close association with my college in Oxford, Corpus Christi College, but also was involved with his partner in securing a large part of the Greek and Roman Museum in Boston, and many items in the Metropolitan Museum. When he died, his estate offered it to the British Museum, and the director, Dennis Haynes at the time, was very anxious to purchase it for the British Museum. Unfortunately, the chairman of the trustees in those days was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who did not consider this item, in particular because of the subject matter, that it was appropriate. As a result of that, it was then purchased on behalf of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. But when it entered New York, it was refused entry because of the subject matter, and this was in 1953.
Rough times for the LGBT community at that time, right?
Sorry?
Rough times for the LGBT community at that time.
If you put it into that context, it is in a way again a great shame and regret that that cup wasn't properly recognized for what it is and what it stands for. As a result, the state sold it to a grand dealer of antiquities at the time, and was then purchased by an American collector. She had it on loan to the Antiques Museum in Basel, in Switzerland. And that's where, I think it must have been around about 1985, I first saw it. I knew about it. First saw the cup on display. Fortunately, I managed to find out who the owner was, and immediately called her and said, I understand you own this extraordinary piece and have it on loan in Basel. Could I ask you, if you ever decide to sell it, if you will offer it to me first? And she agreed.
Did you know her before?
I did know her before.
Oh, okay. Could you tell us who was he or she?
Well, she's a wonderful person who has collected, has been in partnership with a gallery in New York, a great supporter of American museums, and she obviously recognized and knew the importance of the cup when she purchased it. Interesting enough, the Basel Museum had shown it in a way that seen by those who walked past it as if it might be different to what it actually was. Years went by, and there was no indication that she would ever wish to sell it. Years went by, and then I became aware that the cup had left Basel Museum and arrived in New York and was now in the Metropolitan Museum.
What year was that? What year?
That was about, I suspect it was the late 80s, early 90s. And that was, I knew her close links with the museum world in America, and I never even gave a second thought because it was on loan and it was announced that it would never leave the Metropolitan. Never say never, perhaps.
Yes.
It was beautifully displayed, and then about 4 or 5 years after that, I received a call to say by an intermediary saying that she had agreed to offer to me first if she ever decided to sell it, and she was considering selling it at that time.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Well, it was wonderful. The first thing I did was call the director of the Greek and Roman department, Dr. Duffrey Williams, to say that I'd been offered the Warren Cup. And he almost couldn't believe it because he said it's in the Metropolitan.
Yeah. And the Metropolitan said it would
Well,
never leave Metropolitan.
The fact of the matter was that, I said, this is an opportunity for the British Museum to acquire it. He then asked me what amount was involved, and I explained that it was £1.8 million.
My God.
And which I did not consider a lot of money at all for that item. And well, we both realized, because I at the time was chairman of the Greek and Roman support group of the British Museum, that it would be impossible to find the funds necessary to be able to purchase immediately, which is what was required, and presumably why I was offered it. So I made a decision, and I said to the British Museum, I would purchase it, my trustees would purchase it. The British Museum would have 1 year to find the 1.8 million, and if they didn't find the 1.8 million, I was free to do, I'd basically given them first refusal for a year at that price. Otherwise I'd be free to do with it what I chose.
Wow, so I understand that was the most expensive item ever bought by the British Museum, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so...
I think it was and is to this day.
To this day.
As far as I know.
Right. So, going on with this history, very interesting. How did you manage for them to accept to purchase? Only when you offered your trustees?
No. The obvious supporters of a historic important piece of art, which had spent many years in Britain, is the Lottery Heritage Fund, the Arts Fund, and also private benefactors who support the museum in purchases. And at the end, they were approached, and but unfortunately, at the end of the year, or prior to the full year, it had been turned down by the lottery funds at the time. And I then met with the arts minister, and who of course personally had not been aware of this. And it was understandable that it had been turned down because it wasn't in Britain at the time of purchase, it was outside Britain.
Yes.
But when he realized how important this was, in every way, the craftsmanship, the subject matter, the history, the Arts Council, the lottery, heritage, the lottery funds, heritage funds, reconsidered and did contribute a very sizable amount, as did the Art Fund and some private funding, but we were still short.
Right, what's missing?
And in the end, my trustees contributed a very significant sum to make the purchase possible, close to 30% of the purchase price.
Right. So, but we are only telling here about the price at that time.
Well, the answer is, well, you know, people have said it was an extraordinary thing to secure it for the British Museum. It was, but it was also an incredible gift, because I had been advised, as the British Museum formally was advised at the time of their consideration, that had the cup been put in auction, the price would have been at least twice the price that it was offered to the British Museum. So that plus my contribution, my trustees' contribution, it was a very significant contribution. But it pales into insignificance that it was possible to secure this cup for the British Museum. And when it was purchased with the support of these distinguished bodies, when it was announced, life-size photographs of the Royal Cup appeared on the front page of most of the British newspapers, ranging from the Sun, the Mirror, the Telegraph, the Times. And it is perhaps a moment to reflect that what an extraordinary experience it must have been for almost all readers to see a cup, a beautiful cup, made of Greek craftsmanship of the very best, displayed on the front page of the newspapers with an explicit, very explicit scenes of male-to-male lovemaking. And this would have been seen by everybody. And here was clearly an item, something so beautiful and important that it overcame the prejudices which we all know have existed for too long. And it is an item that I think every person should know about, because it shows that these prejudices are recent, in many cases religiously brought on, and didn't exist in ancient times.
Yes, it was just a matter of showing the guests how they lived, how was the culture at that time in the households of the ancient Rome.
Well, I think this would have been, the scene of the cup, this would have been in a pretty grand house for anybody to have had a cup of that kind, or cups of that kind. Because they were silver, it was only because it was hidden, most probably, when there was political upheaval in Palestine or Israel at the time, whatever it was at the time. But but the scene too is one of the two young men, or boys almost, are from very good families because their hairstyle shows it.
Yes.
And this was not something involving, you know, the servant is looking round the door to see
Yes.
the goings on. And the other side is clearly an older man with a younger man, which is really again in the tradition of the Greeks, where a relationship between an older and a younger man was considered totally appropriate, in fact necessary for proper education.
That's it. Yes. I think that was a representation of an era that showed us how we changed across time. I mean, how this kind of relationship within families and tradition and concepts just changed within the years. So maybe it's a piece of art for us to think about what we want to the future.
I think it's simply a recognition of the prejudices which are recent prejudices.
Yes, yes.
And it should be of, in a way, almost comfort to many who had particular views to see this piece, which you can now, you know, see in the British Museum, and we can all learn from it, and it deserves to be known. And so, therefore, I was very willing and grateful that you decided to interview me about this subject.
Yes, I was very glad also, Sir Claude, that you were willing to give me this interview, because I saw that was a piece of art that has a meaning for the LGBT community and also for the entire world, to see what was our past and to start planning our future on that basis. So that was very important, which I'm very thankful for you. I would like to thank you very much, Sir Claude, for having me here and to explain us a little bit more about this item, this iconic item, as I said, is a historic piece of art that is now, and for a long time in the British Museum, people who want to know a little bit more could go there and see it or Google it. There is a vast documentation about this cup, but there was pieces of information that you could only have it here, with Sir Claude giving us this gift of some information, the cup that you would never hear anywhere else. So thank you very much, Sir Claude, for having me here once more.
A pleasure.